So I'm going to go ahead and call the Tuesday, February 1st, 2022 City Council regular meeting to order. Madam City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Kaylee Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Moran.
Present.
Councilmember Karen Howe.
Here.
Councilmember Amy Lamb.
Here.
Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Madam City Clerk, we do have a quorum. Councilmember Moran, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved. Deputy Mayor Clark, give your hand up. Need a second before we can have any discussion on this, though. I'll second. Okay. Discussion. Councilmember, or excuse me, Deputy Mayor Clark.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a motion to just change one small thing on the agenda, moving item number 1, the voting procedures and interview, to before executive session, just so we can talk about process before we go in executive session, just directly following public comment.
Okay, so we'd have discussion on the process and then executive session following. Okay, so that's an amendment. Councilmember Lamb.
I move to amend the agenda to discuss a council violation of Council Rule 2.7, which is conduct of outside of council meetings. Specifically Council Rule 2.71, which addresses personal attacks and negative comments.
The amendment needs a second to be considered.
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay, it's been seconded. So the first amendment is, Councilmember Lamb, can you repeat what your?
I wanted to address or discuss violation of Council Rule 2.71, which addresses personal attacks and negative comments. I can read that.
No, that's okay. We can tackle that. I just wanted to make sure I got it right for the purposes of the city clerk's office. Okay. So this, we're voting on the amendment only currently, which is, actually, I think we need to do the first amendment first, and then this amendment, and then the agenda wholesale as amended. So the first amendment was to move item 1, basically reverse the order on the executive session and item 1. So that's the first amendment. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Councilmember Moran, I'm not sure we got your.
Yeah, I was an aye.
Aye, okay. By a vote of 6-0, the ayes have it, so we'll move that discussion in front of executive session. The second amendment is to discuss the violation of Rule 2.71 of the council rules. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I'm a nay. I think I said nay.
Okay. By a vote of 4-2, we will add that under new business, and we'll do that as kind of 13A. So that'll be the last new business item that we tackle. Okay, so now we are approving the agenda as amended. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 5-1, the amended agenda is approved. All right, next we have public comment. Pursuant to the governor's emergency proclamation 20-28, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual city council meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment is able to be submitted. Written public comment will be accepted up until 5 p.m. on the day of the meeting. You can submit written comments by emailing them to the city clerk, lhashi@smammish.us, and the city council at smammish.us. For verbal comment, you can join the Zoom meeting. If you'd like to give verbal comment, information on how to join is listed under meeting accessibility at the top of our city council agenda. Up to 3 minutes of verbal public comment may be provided per person live during the meeting. During public comment, the city clerk will ask attendees to press the raise hand button if they wish to give comment. If joining the meeting by phone, you will dial *9 to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute you and you will be given the ability to turn your web camera on if desired. You will be notified when you have 15 seconds remaining to wrap up your comments, after which you will be muted at the end of the 3-minute comment period. Madam City Clerk.
If you wish to provide public comment, please raise your hand. At the moment, I see 3 people that have raised their hand for public comment. I will now transfer the first caller. Ramiro.
Hey, former Deputy Mayor Ramiro Valderrama. There appears to be no end in sight to the ethical and potentially legal concerns regarding our city leadership and the expanding Malchow gate across the city. The public continues to raise ever more questions about transparency, accountability, mishandling confidential data, OPM violations. The City Council's investigation of the city manager was completed around November, yet no action has been taken. The full unredacted report has not been released despite multiple PRR requests from citizens and even the Seattle Times. There continues to be repeated executive sessions now, though there seems to be no new evidence being presented. Council is not allowed to deliberate behind closed doors. All public business and deliberations need to be done in public. This appears to citizens to be potentially yet another OPMA violation. Further concerns of ethics violations are related to the executive sessions that included statements of a council member overheard on and posted on Zoom of January 18th meeting that 2 council members were who had left the session allegedly because Mayor Malchow would not permit a city paid attorney to attend, while even at the same time, Malchow's own attorney was permitted to attend a meeting. Where in the state law is this permitted? Why would Mayor Malchow not want a city attorney present to ensure that state rules and transparency are followed? This is interestingly follows earlier cited PRR 4053 that cited declarations that Mayor Malchow kicked out of an executive session 2 council members, Treen and Gamblin, for questioning an NDA that I had provided the council that was both unprecedented, unethical, and likely illegal in violation of the Open Public Meetings Act and PRRs. These are actions in addition to earlier ones I've stated of citizens citing they had received confidential information on November 18th from Malchow and alleging July 21, Mayor Malchow had also shared confidential. There's another one that's come to light, which is Mayor Malchow and other council members' use of encrypted communications to avoid passing out information, and the city manager in his December 14th statement calls out council members for using private emails to communicate city business, saying that it's to conduct business and never know if it was truly all submitted in a PRR. Also, he cited that on December 14th, I can share that I've been directly asked by the deputy mayor in a meeting to facilitate a private meeting between the resident blocker and our land use attorney.
15 seconds.
So this is clearly unethical, unprecedented, and likely illegal and would expose the city to tremendous liability for a third party. The citizens need to understand how deep this is and to have it addressed. And please release the full unredacted report for the investigation.
Ida, I'd like to ask Ramiro a quick question. Ramiro, you made a comment about that there appears to be no new information delivered at executive sessions. And how do you know that?
Because nobody has presented anything to the public that we've heard. We know that the report was turned in November. We know that in January that you had from Rudette received his report that was written out of the public comment or something to the defense that's gone forward. That was cited, that was going to be provided. No one's heard of any other request for information. And that's why I said it appears to be that there is no other new information that's coming to the council. Yet you've held another full day special session and the other. So the citizens would like to know what is being looked at. Is this over? He asked for a public hearing and nothing's being done about it month after month. Yeah, we'd love to be enlightened. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question as well. You're asserting that I had an attorney. Oh, is he still on or did he go?
I transferred it. I can bring him back if you'd like.
I'd like to ask him a question.
Okay, one moment.
And I'm back.
Great. Mr. Valderrama, I'd like to ask you a question. I did respond to your email, which is essentially the exact same comment you just gave here. But I'd like to know who's telling you who's in executive session.
Who's an executive? I just stated, if you look at my statement in Zoom, it was overheard and it was posted by citizens on the Facebook page.
What citizens are posting about who's in our executive sessions?
Let me say it again, as I wrote. The Zoom session had, and it was overheard by citizens, and it was written in the Smammish progressives on Facebook, what they overheard, that Karen Moran and Ken Treen had left the executive sessions. That was overheard on a hot mic, as they like to say. And that
Okay,
was
but that's not what you said. You said, I had an attorney in executive session. I would like to know how you know what attorneys are in our executive session.
How I had found that out afterwards on that because of some of the stuff that was again cited on the Zooms and on the chats as to what's going on. Is this again dealing with the attorneys as the one before? But these are all on Facebooks that you can go in. And I try on each of these, cite the public records request numbers, again, cite the dates that these are taking. Likewise, the accusations that were made by Rudette, I've given you the dates of his public comment that cite those accusations against you, trying to also bring a citizen to our suit of the city against another party. So those are all being cited. I'm trying to cite the dates on each of these in the document for you.
Well, not everything you overhear is accurate, so.
May not be, but that's why I'm asking when it's repeated that you should be investigating this.
Maybe
And
we
it's
should.
not just for, and I should point out.
Right, Mr. Valderrama, I can't allow you to have additional time. I just wanted to ask you that one simple question.
You brought me back.
I did. I wanted to ask you the question about who's telling you stuff about what's going on in executive
But I
session.
point out that I said for all council members that are violating should be investigated. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will now transfer the next caller. Mary Wichter.
Hi, this is Mary Wichter, and I've lived in Smammish for 21 years. I wanted to speak to the Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project tonight. The prior council we had brought it up through Mark Cross and I having concerns that we'd really like to have the stormwater with the sidewalk on top of it, and it needs to connect all the way down Lewis Thompson to 205th here, which is pictured behind me. That's a family who lives in the neighborhood just walking, and you can see that there's no sidewalk there. The road also, the people are pretty quick because it's pretty steep downhill. And then the East Lake Smammish Trail will be completing, and they will be putting a walkway up to that light. So it's really important to be able to continue that. And in your packet tonight, staff has done a great job for $16,000 or $17,000 added. We can get some engineering done to see what that would cost. So I hope that you as the new council will support that. It came from the final quarter of 2021. Also this weekend, I went around to try to inform people who live adjacent to or on Lewis Thompson Road, make sure they know what's going on. A lot of people have seen the survey. They're very excited about the project, and many, many, many people support the sidewalks, first of all, just so they could use it more, so they wouldn't be fearful walking, so they could walk together or with pets. And a lot of children don't even use it because it's just too dangerous, and safety is really an issue. Also for school bus stop pickups, the kids end up exposed on the roadway, and then when there's flooding, it makes it worse. So a lot of people supported it, and I did send, it was after 5, it was about half an hour ago. The petition I have about 30 signatures so far. I'd done 15 in the past. And it gives all the names. I primarily did that because when we had written letters in support of getting grants, you need to have community support. So I wanted to make sure that we have that. You can see that I'm just calling it a draft because I'll probably keep working on it. But everybody would really like to have the sidewalks and the drainage. And some people have been mentioned they'd like to have sewer. And I know that's Smammish Plateau Waters area. And then the last thing I'm working on, I was going to update the presentation I had from flooding on the 18th and the 25th. And I've almost got that done. I didn't finish it before the meeting. But one of the concerns I have is not only the amount of water that I saw, but I did get a response back from the city manager, Dave Rudat, and they had found a clog. And so I wanted a little bit more clarity on where that was. And one of the reasons is there's been a lot of changes to how the stormwater works up at the top of Zaccoose. A lot of things from Dito Estates and Broadmoor Acres in the top part on 211th are now piped to Zaccoose Creek rather than going to the wetlands, which is at the headlands of Zaccoose Creek. They're piped right to what's called the main stem through a pipe, and it comes out like a fire hose, which causes erosion. And I couldn't find it, but at Kristen
15 seconds.
had a picture of Zaccoose Creek, and it does get covered with gravel down there, and it's because there's too much force. So we need to have detention. So when I get that in, I'd like council to support that staff would look at that with their project to make sure that we're getting the right things done for this project. It's so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, is there anyone additional that has signed up?
Yes, we have one more caller.
Thank you.
Paul Stickney.
Good evening, City Council. Paul Stickney, Smammish here. Calling about your number 12 King County Urban Growth Capacity Study revisions. Sent an email today. I'm not going to read that whole thing at all into the record, just going to summarize it a bit. But the first thing I ask is, I understand the county used OFM numbers for estimating the number of homes built in Smammish from 2006 to 19, but that number was off by well over 1,000 housing units. I think that's too extreme. I suggest using actual numbers in readjusting our internal growth target. The second thing is, I didn't see in reviewing all the meetings any specific numbers shared publicly for the non-discretionary UGCS phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. I suggest that those numbers be shared publicly and talked about to inform the revised growth target approach. It's not just important for our regional growth target that we negotiate with King County. This also is a major foundation of the Bluma EIS and or any other EISs that may be commissioned in the future that deal with land use. And the other thing is our periodic comp plan is coming up in middle of 2024. But I'd like to talk about what I believe is underarching even all of that. And there are sort of 5 sets of 3 words that are based on the record that's been built over the last few years of those that support optimizing in Smammish. And they are obtain lacking information, reduce traffic congestion, alleviate housing misdevelopment, enable holistic enrichments, and 2 symbiotic visions in Smammish, 1 for 95% of the city and 1 for 5%. Why? because the optimal application of these concepts can advance virtually every constituent part that makes up our community well above and beyond the advantages and the benefits we have today across the board. And that can be achieved
15 seconds.
sustainably, I might add. In short, it's a real opportunity right now to enrich and sustain our community now and for generations to come.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, does that conclude everyone?
That concludes the public comment for tonight.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll move to our next item, which is a discussion of the interview process and voting of finalists to be interviewed. Deputy Mayor Clark, give your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I would like to make a motion for a process idea. I don't know if that would be appropriate here if you have a discussion first.
Well, we can have a discussion. If you want to make a motion, I think that's fine. And then we can discuss the merits of that.
Copy that. All right, so I make a motion that I believe Lita either has a project spreadsheet or can probably make one. So has our names and the candidates' names fully, projected on the screen. Each council member will get 3 votes in no particular order. The top 3 vote getters will be interviewed next week with an option of a 4th interview if that third place level vote is tied.
Second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion. Deputy Mayor Clark, did you want to speak to your motion?
Only that I wanted to get the process out there first. We all had an understanding. I think, we did for the boards and commissions, the rank choice. And me personally, I felt like this is a way more straightforward than the rank choice voting. So thank you.
Councilmember Trine.
Yeah, just for clarification, so the idea would be that if after tallying the votes, if there was candidates 3 and 4 were either tied or we decided that we wanted to actually interview 4 people, that would be okay. That's what you meant?
Yeah, I thought if it was 4 votes, 3 votes, 2 and 2 votes or something in that third place, that we could have that option of interviewing 4 if that was a tie at that level.
Thank you for the clarification.
That makes good sense.
Councilmember Lamb.
I wanted to add that it would be good to have standardized questions during the interview process, like 2 or 3, where all the candidates are asked the same question, so we get to compare, and then we can ask perhaps 1 or 2, if depending on the number of candidates.
Councilmember Lamb, I would request that you make that an amendment so that we can discuss the merits of that one, and then. Do you want to formalize that as an amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
So I motion that we have standardized 2 or 3 standardized questions that we ask all the candidates, depending on the number of candidates, and then to ask individual questions, 1 or 2 individual questions.
I'll second that amendment.
Okay, that amendment has been moved and seconded. So just for everyone's clarification, we're now discussing the amendment. Councilmember Trine. Actually, Councilmember Lamb, did you want to speak to your amendment?
No.
Okay. Councilmember Trine. You're on mute, Councilmember Trine.
Thank you. So the amendment is for questions being asked after we select the candidates to be interviewed.
Yes. Those being interviewed, what the amendment was standardized questions, 2 to 3 standardized questions for every candidate. And then each individual council member, this is my understanding, Councilmember Lamb, correct me if I'm wrong, please. Each individual council member would then get 1 to 2 questions for each candidate. They could be whatever you wanted.
And this would be after we narrow down the field to 3 or 4 candidates, correct?
She's nodding. So yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Trin, did you have anything else or? No, okay. Any other questions, discussion on this amendment?
Do we have a second on this amendment?
I will second the amended motion. Or is that, no, it's
It's an
new,
amendment.
sorry. It's an amendment, never mind.
I think someone did, but I don't remember who it was. But if not, then
I
Councilmember Howe.
I seconded the original.
Oh, that's okay. Karen, yes. Councilmember Moran seconded the amendment. Thank you. Okay, so we are voting on the amendment currently, which is standardized questions, 2 to 3 for each candidate, and then 1 to 2 individual questions from individual council members. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 6-0, the amendment passes. Now we will move to the main motion, which is a spreadsheet. And Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Clark, correct me if I misquote your motion, please. A spreadsheet with each candidate's name, each council member's name, and the top 3 vote getters will end up getting interviewed. In the event that there is a tie, we would then have potentially a 4th.
Yeah, in that 3rd place level, if there's a tie, we could interview like the 3rd and 4th place, and then each council member gets 3 votes total.
Okay, total of 3 votes. Thank you.
I guess, and can't vote for one person twice. Sorry, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. Okay, so now we are voting on the main motion as amended. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 6-0, we have our process established. So at this point, we can either discuss the questions or we can go into executive session and discuss the qualifications of the applicants. But I don't think we can talk about the questions in executive session, only the applicants and their qualifications. So if the council's pleasure is to talk questions, we needed to do that out here, and that would probably be, or we can have a process where Mr. City Manager or Carrie, who's our attorney, can advise us if we can provide questions and they can maybe consolidate. I think if we're gonna have 2 to 3 standardized questions, the collective body needs to discuss that. Deputy Mayor Clark.
Yes, I'm not sure if you guys had any standardized questions from last year. I know Lita did put together a document if there's anything that might give us a starting point.
Lita sent me something earlier today. And of course, I can't see any emails suddenly. So I don't know if they were questions though. Lita, can you chime in? Were they actual questions or was it more process related?
I went back to the meeting last year and I just made a note of the questions that were asked, but it wasn't complete. I got I think maybe 12 of them.
Okay, I'm pulling it up right now. Oh, so this isn't actual questions that we would ask the candidate though. This is process related, like how many applicants do you want to interview? Which applicants do you
Yes, if you scroll down, it should be further down on the.
I don't see it. That's the only attachment I see.
Okay.
So if council has questions that they want to ask, generically like a blanket question for all the candidates, this would be the time to verbalize those. Carrie?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Carrie Sand, your city attorney, interim city attorney, I should say. So just to give you maybe a jumping off point for discussing standardized questions, I just wanted to give you some sample questions that I've seen a lot of other jurisdictions use for your consideration. So one is, of course, this really broad question, why do you want to serve on the city council, right? What experiences, talents, or skills do you bring to the council and community that you would like to highlight? Another common question is, are there any regional issues or forums in which you have a particular interest or expertise? You know, for example, does someone have interest or expertise in transportation, water quality, human services, parks and open space, things like that? The list is endless. Another example is, do you want to serve on the city council because of a particular local issue on which you want to work, or are your interests more broadly distributed? You know, things like that. It's really trying to get to what their aspirations are for joining the council.
So I think the application itself had at least the first question that our city attorney posed. So we don't probably need to ask those again, but I'm happy to take suggestions from council. Deputy Mayor Clark.
Yeah, I do like, if questions 2, 3, 4 are separate enough, I did like those as standardized, you know, like what are your, like what special qualifications do you have or interests in local or broad? I do like that, that she offered up.
Councilmember Lamb.
I'd like to ask the question, what is your view on growth in Smammish?
Councilmember Howe.
Where do you see Smammish fitting in a regional structure or framework?
I feel like I'm trying to rack my brain right now for what general questions I'd want to ask them. And I admit I'm struggling a little bit right now to come up with those questions. It is possible for us to pause on this conversation, go into executive session, and then come back out. And maybe that will help us think about those general questions that we can come back out here and discuss. I think Lita just sent the email too. So it's whatever council's pleasure is relative to executive session, and then circling back on this topic out at the dais, or continuing on trying to.
Does this require a motion?
No, we can go back to executive session anytime. We just need to alert the public.
Yeah, let's come back to this after.
Okay, I think that's good. And if the intent is to take any action, then I would need to know action would be by formal voting on which candidates. Otherwise, we would do that in another meeting. I feel like our city attorney is about to unmute herself and say something. Maybe not.
Sorry, Mayor, I was getting a message. I just wanted to make sure that you announced the expected duration of the executive session. Okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify to make sure if there's action planned this evening for voting on anybody, we would need to announce that, because we're going back to discuss the applicants in executive session. So if there is anticipation of action, I need to know, because I need to announce that as we go back into executive session. So if someone's planning to vote, then I need to know that. Deputy Mayor Clark.
Yes, I would like to vote for our finalists when we come out of executive session.
Okay.
And I think maybe 30 minutes, I'm not sure, for executive session.
I think we might want to say 45.
Yeah, we can't tie our shoes in 30 minutes.
So, okay, so let's say 45 minutes. So let's be back here roughly 7:50-ish. And we do anticipate action. And let me pull the RCW. This is to evaluate the qualifications of a candidate for appointment to elective office pursuant to RCW 42.30.110(1)H. There is also another RCW on here. I don't know if we're planning to talk about this all at the same time, or if we can bifurcate this executive session, because there's litigation on here too.
I think bifurcation makes sense.
Council, it is 7:50 p.m. To make sure we have everybody back. Looks like we don't have Councilmember Treen yet. Let's give him just a minute to be able to return. I think everybody did what I just did, which was to go get food.
I think I got a little peanut butter over here.
I'm sitting here eating oatmeal, so.
You're in PJ sandwiches, Karen.
We still don't have Councilmember Treen. I don't know if he's having a connection issue. Lita or Dave, can you confirm that they're ready to have us roll again? Or are we rolling?
I believe he's ready. He's back there.
Okay.
We're ready to go.
Lita, we don't have Councilmember Treen on. Would you mind reaching out to him just to see if he's maybe not having a similar connectivity issue?
Okay, I'll check with him.
Thank you. Okay, Council. Well, I don't want to have the public staring at a screen of us just sitting here. So we'll hope that Lita can get Councilmember Treen back on before we take any action. But so we are back to our discussion and voting for the finalists to be interviewed. And hopefully we get Councilmember Treen back here very quickly. Oh, there we go. I can see him popping on. Perfect. Lita, can you just kind of walk council through if you've got a spreadsheet and whether or not you can put that up on the screen so that both council and the public can see it?
Yes, I have a spreadsheet that I will share, and I'll do that right now so you can see.
That'd be great. And then I don't know if process is better to go by council member and which 3 candidates they're voting for, or by candidate.
Can you see the screen now?
I can, yeah. So maybe what it looks easiest to me is to just ask the council members, starting on the left-hand side with Deputy Mayor Clark, who her top 3 are, and just move across the.
Okay, that sounds good.
If council does that work, is not to put you on the spot, Deputy Mayor, as the first one to cast votes, but if that works for everyone, that looks easy enough. So for the public, this the council is just going to select 3 candidates to which we are choosing to interview. So Deputy Mayor Clark, I'm going to turn it over to you to inform the city clerk which 3 candidates you would like.
Great. Thank you, Lita. I choose Miss Dina Ann, Pamela Stewart, and Roisin O'Farrell.
Councilmember Howe?
And I choose, or I'm voting for rather, Pamela Stewart, Roisin O'Farrell, Kathy Richardson.
Councilmember Lamb?
I am voting for Ms. Dina Ann, Pam Stewart, and Roisin O'Farrell.
And Lita, I am doing Samuel Rodabaugh, Kathy Richardson, and Jerry Norman. Councilmember Moran?
I am doing Josh Amato, Kathy Richardson, and Jerry Norman.
Councilmember Trine?
Jerry Norman. Kathy Richardson. Josh Amato.
So we have one with 4. So it looks like Kathy Richardson. And then council, this is the scenario we discussed. We have 3 other members with 3. So do we want to bring then Roshino Farrell, Pamela Stewart, and Jerry Norman in and have 4 interviews?
Sure.
Yes.
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 Okay. So then I would, Ms. City Attorney, would it be proper for us to make a motion just wholesale for the 4 top candidates? Or is this sufficient, the voting that's here?
It would be proper to have a motion consistent with what is shown on the screens for council voting.
Thank you. So I would entertain a motion to bring Kathy Richardson, Jerry Norman, Pamela Stewart, and Roshino Farrell back for an interview.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 6-0, we will have 4 candidates return for interviews.
Can I make one quick comment too, just about how wonderful all of the candidates were, and that we were very impressed with everyone's qualifications. And this was actually an extraordinarily difficult decision, I think, for all of us.
Indeed. Thank you for saying that. Yes, it was a very challenging decision based on the applicants and their level of quality. Indeed. Thank you. Okay, so council, now we are moving on to consent. So I'd entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
I move we accept the consent calendar as is.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 6-0, consent calendar is passed. Next, we move to presentations and proclamations. We have a proclamation for Children's Dental Health Month. Councilmember Howe, would you mind reading that? If you can get it up. Did I call you last time? I need to keep a spreadsheet. Okay, Councilmember Lamb, do you have that proclamation up?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay, who's got the, okay. Our city attorney's got her hand up, so let me.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have my hand raised simply because it was my understanding there would be another executive session, and I didn't know how far into the agenda the council would get before having its next executive session. I say that just simply because I want to be mindful of everyone's time, including those participating.
Okay, so I'm not sure who's waiting in the wings for that executive session. Is it other attorneys or staff that won't be? Okay, all right, so then.
I believe we have outside counsel and we have staff.
Okay. So then if the council is okay with it, can we do the proclamation, Carrie, and then right before, just because we.
Absolutely, that's fine. Okay. I just wanted it sooner than later. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we'll do the presentation and proclamation and then the other half of that executive session. Okay, so back to who's got the proclamation up and is able to read it.
Smammish, Washington Proclamation, National Children's Dental Health Month. Whereas the future is, to the large measure, dependent on the good health of our children and families, and whereas good health can be achieved in part through good dental habits and oral health care learned early and reinforced throughout life, And whereas good oral health contributes to better nutrition, improved ability to concentrate, and improved school attendance. And whereas the city of Sammamish is dedicated to a strong commitment to all children in our community through many early childhood and school programs. And whereas National Children's Dental Health Month is celebrated each February in order to raise awareness about the importance of good oral health. And whereas in years past, the City for Pediatric Dentistry at the University of Washington's School of Dentistry welcomed children from throughout Washington for free preventive dental care at an event called Give Kids a Smile that include an oral exam, teeth cleaning, x-rays, and fluoride application. Now, therefore, Christy Malchow, Mayor of the City of Sammamish, on behalf of the Sammamish City Council, does hereby proclaim February 2022 to be National Children's Dental Health Month in the City of Sammamish. And I encourage all citizens to join me in this special observance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Train. Okay, Council, so next we'll have that executive session. This is potential litigation pursuant to, yes. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Lamb.
Since we were just talking about proclamations, I just wanted to acknowledge that today is the first day of the Lunar New Year. And that, well, I am Chinese, and I just wanted to say today's the first day of Chinese New Year. So to everybody that's watching, Happy New Year.
Thank you. Okay, so executive session, this is to for potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101I. And Madam City Attorney or Mr. City Manager, I have no idea on the time.
Okay, so it is for potential and pending litigation, and the time is 45 minutes. So if we could reconvene at approximately 8:47.
Okay, all right, Council, we'll see you up. Thank you. We're not expecting any action, are we?
No, no action is expected.
Thank you. Hey, Council, it is 8:47. Mr. City Manager or Lita, can you just confirm that they're rolling cameras?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you so much. I got signed out of iCompass, so signing back in here. Okay, our next item is under unfinished business, item 10, which is the discussion of review of legal contracts. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Deputy City Manager Scott McCall and Interim City Attorney Carrie Sand are going to present.
Thank you. So good evening again, Mayor, Council members, members of the public. My name is Carrie Sand, and I am serving as the Interim City Attorney with the Ogden Murphy Wallace Law Firm. And you will recall that at your January 4th regular meeting, the council asked during discussion of the Eglick and Whited contract and whether to extend the contract authority for that contract. Council asked for a briefing on all active legal services contracts. And so here we are tonight following up on that request. Again, you'll also probably recall that at that meeting, we talked about the need for an extension of the Eglick and Whited contract. And in addition, I'll highlight for you some other contracts that are likely to require extension. But just by way of explanation, I wanted to say that there's only been one regular meeting between the January 4th meeting and tonight, and that was January 18th. Some of you may think that this took a long time to prepare, but actually it did not, considering that through this process, we learned that the management of these contracts was decentralized. And so one of the benefits of following up is that we believe we have created some internal system improvements regarding centralizing how these contracts are tracked. So for purposes of the discussion, I have asked that 2 different spreadsheets be prepared, and I'm going to screen share with you and first look at the city's criminal contracts. So just one moment while I activate screen sharing. Okay, so this is the agenda bill for this presentation, and I'm now just going to advance to the criminal spreadsheet. Okay, so it's quite small like this, so let me take a moment and just try to enlarge it a little bit and make it so that you can see it a little bit more easily. So what I want to focus everyone's attention on right now is this left-hand column with the name of the various providers. All of these providers listed on this spreadsheet help the city, help the city furnish criminal justice services. So we've of course got the prosecution firm, as well as the domestic violence advocate, Ms. Layton, the public defense screener who makes sure that there is screening performed to determine if someone is eligible for public defense services. Of course, the city of Smammish does not have its own municipal or district court. And so that is a contract where the city contracts with King County for those services, which are provided through Issaquah. And then in addition, we have 2 public defense firms. The routine firm is Stein, Lotzgar, and Starr, and then we've got Conflict Public Defense Counsel. You'll see asterisks there noting that the city attorney's office does not manage these contracts due to a conflict, and the conflict is because we manage the prosecution contract. So those are managed in a different part of the city, just to make sure there's a separation there. So I just wanted to explain that because again, it's an explanation of why the process was a bit decentralized. So we did prepare this specifically for tonight's briefing. And then if council would like, we can go through and touch on each of these in more detail. Just very briefly, you'll see that for the prosecution contract, there is a monthly amount, a flat monthly amount, there's no not to exceed on it because in addition, there's an hourly charge for traffic infractions. But you'll see that the monthly amounts of this are fairly consistent within a pretty small range of variance here. And so this shows you the year 2021 actual payments to the Moberly and Roberts law firm for prosecution services. On the next slide, you'll see that we have a similar summary for the domestic violence advocate who only bills every other month. And again, there's not a huge variance from one billing cycle to the next. And you'll see again, the actual amount paid in 2021 for those services. Moving on to the next one, we've got Mr. Hampton, the public defense screener. Those amounts are listed and if you prefer, I don't have to go through each one of these, but you'll see that the amounts are all in your packet and it's revealed how much each particular criminal contract cost the city in the year 2021. So hopefully this level of detail is helpful and gives everyone a window into what it costs to provide criminal justice services. These services are largely required and non-discretionary. We have to provide these, again, to provide criminal justice services to the community. So fast forwarding now, I'm going to talk about the contracts related to general city attorney work and civil litigation. You can see there are far more of these, and generally speaking, these are more discretionary. So I want to provide a big picture overview before we do the detailed dive into each one of these. And that big picture overview at a glance is shown in a bar chart in your packet at page 76. And you'll see in this bar chart that comparing the budget authority for the current biennium 2021-2022, the expenditures, the actual expenditures in 2021 are well below the budgeted authority. So for 2021, the city attorney's office and the city as a whole spent about 67% of the budget authority for that particular year. And you'll see, of course, no surprise, I don't think, the largest category of spending was for civil litigation. So that's at a glance. Let's now look at a detailed summary of the civil contracts. So here is a detailed summary. And as you can see, looking at this, the largest line items are for the Eglick and Whited firm, in addition to Kenyon Decent. So we'll go through each one of these and talk a little bit more about those. So first up is the Kenyon Decent contract. Now, the Kenyon Decent firm has been providing primary city attorney services to the city since incorporation in '99 all the way through until 2021, when the council decided to instead hire an in-house city attorney, and that was budgeted for this current biennium that we are in now. The Kenyon Decent firm now provides supplemental legal services. Again, I'm interim and I have just joined the city starting in early January, but from what I see, the services provided by Kenyon Decent are essentially the type of services that would be provided if the city had an in-house assistant city attorney. So they work on overflow work that just is beyond the bandwidth of a single city attorney. They handle code enforcement. They also help with PRA matters. And they just basically help whenever additional capacity is needed, because especially on the civil side, legal services are not static. They are very dynamic. They ebb and flow. The demand fluctuates greatly from day to day, week to week, month to month. And so Kenyon Decent has this contract in place, again, to supplement the services provided day to day by the in-house city attorney's office. Another thing I wanted to note regarding this contract is I did see that one of the council members forwarded to me a public comment about the contract, claiming that there was no hourly rate provided, but in fact, there is an Exhibit A to this contract, and it includes a rate sheet for all of the attorneys and paralegals that they employ, and their hourly rate is based on their level of experience. So as you can imagine, a more experienced attorney, such as Mike Kenyon, charges a higher rate than, for example, a less experienced associate or a paralegal. So there is an Exhibit A rate sheet that goes with that contract. With regard to civil legal contracts, another thing I wanted to mention is that if we go back, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but if we go back to the detail and look at the full listing, this does not necessarily correlate with all claims that are potential or pending, or all lawsuits that are pending. And that's because the city is a member of the Washington City's Insurance Authority Risk Pool, WCIA, and covered claims and lawsuits are handled by WCIA Defense Counsel. So I just wanted to note that those are not included in this summary. And the reason is, again, because it's defense counsel provided through the city's risk pool, WCIA. So I just wanted to make a note of that. And so we will continue on now with the next one, Eglick and Whited. But before I advance to that screen, I wanted to make a point here about the line item for Eglick and Whited. This is an accurate number of the amount spent by the city of Smammish for this firm in 2021 only. And if you compare that to the larger spreadsheet, you'll see that the number for Eglick and Whited, let me scroll right so everyone can see that. You'll see that it's a larger number, and that's because that number represents the amount spent by the city with that firm since inception of those services. So I hope that makes sense. That's the distinction there. So this is the higher number since inception in 2020, and the other is since just 2021 only. Okay, so looking again at Eglick and Whited, that was the focus of your January 4th meeting, you may recall, and there are actually 3 different contracts with this firm. And there was a detailed summary provided again at your January 4th meeting, and then the council authorized this increase shown down here in the green So you'll see this box down in the lower left since January 4th, where council authorized an additional $65,000. And then you'll see that subtracted out of that is the amount due for the November invoice, December invoice, and then you'll see the remaining contract authority to date. So any questions before I move on to the next provider? Councilmember Howe.
So I had just a quick question. Back on one of your earlier slides, I'm going to say it's slide 11 and from the packet, where you're showing actual versus budget. And I'm wondering, why is the differential so extreme? And is it because we're anticipating something that isn't documented somewhere, or what?
So you're talking about this bar chart, Councilmember Howe?
Yes, in litigation in specific.
Well, my best response to that question is that budgeting for litigation is challenging. It is very hard to predict the amount of litigation a city will find itself engaged in over the course of a year. It is not hazarding a guess. It is an educated estimate based on past litigation, but it's not always predictive of future. So I would say in this regard, the city should consider itself fortunate because it did not meet or need to spend its entire litigation budget for 2021. And so, presumably that's carried over into 2022, the next biennium year, the current year that we're in now. That's my understanding. And maybe Deputy City Manager Scott McCall wants to add on that, but I would just say the city should consider itself fortunate in that regard.
Thank you.
Scott?
Sure, and just a brief follow-up, again, Scott McCall, Deputy City Manager. Just to follow up on that, if you recall on the Anglican Whited contract discussion from last month, the contract and the issues started in 2020. And so when the budget was put together for the 21-22 biennium, the city was already in spending money on legal contracts with Anglican Whited for 3 different items. And so I think this was a planning for the worst and hoping for the best scenario, if you will, rather than having to come back and say we don't have enough. I think this is a way to responsibly budget for what you think might happen. And if you don't use it all, then as Carrie pointed out, you're in good stead.
Councilmember Lamb.
What's our budget increase compared to previous budgets for litigation?
That's a really good question, Councilmember Lamb. And it's frankly not something that I looked into because it was my understanding the focus of this presentation was on 2021 and current active, but we can certainly look into that and get back to you. So we will provide an answer after looking into that. Is that acceptable? I just don't have that currently. Happy to get back to you. Any other questions before we move on to the next one? Okay, so the next active contract is with Keating, Buckland, and McCormick. And here you can see these numbers in green are the authorized contract amounts. And then you'll see numbers in red in parentheses. These are invoices and amounts paid against that authority. And then you'll see in green the amount remaining on that particular contract with that firm. This is conflict counsel regarding the workplace investigation.
Councilmember Lamb, did you have a question? Or is that still from previous? Okay.
Okay, so the next one is related to investigation services performed by Ms. Weber with the Inslee Best firm. And again, same format, you see the contract authority at the top, you see invoices and amounts that have been charged against that authority, and then you see an amount remaining. There is a remaining balance on that contract as well. before I move on, any questions? So the next one is with Smith Goodfriend. This is ongoing. This is a matter that again relates to land use litigation that the city has been involved in. Again, you see the authorized amounts offset by invoices, and then you see the amount remaining at the bottom. Next is Summit Law, and these are legal services related to collective bargaining with our union partner, AFSCME. And I believe that attorney is Sophia Maybe, and she's been assisting the city with any type of bargaining issues that come up in the context of our labor partners. So that's what this is. And again, you see the contract authority offset by invoices and then the remaining balance on that one as well. Another Summit Law attorney helped for a limited time for a portion of the Kinsey litigation that was not covered by WCIA. There is another portion of this litigation that is covered by WCIA. Those invoices are not submitted to the city because WCIA pays them directly to the firm involved. But for this particular matter, you do see, again, the authority amount offset by invoices charged against that, and then you see a remaining balance there. And then this is the contract with my firm. You'll see that the initial contract authority is the city manager's limit, and that limit is established by Smammish Municipal Code 2.50.010. I was hired just after Lisa announced that she would be ending her city service at the end of December 2021. And this happened, you know, just before the holidays. It was, I think, a situation where there was some urgency surrounding it, wanting me to overlap with Ms. Marshall so that I could get up to speed on some items that were time sensitive. I did just a little bit of work in December. You see the amount of $5,580 for the month of December. I do predict a substantially higher number for January, just because my onboarding, ramping up, getting up to speed on things required some investment of time. And then I just wanted to be very transparent and tell the council that, you know, depending on how long the recruitment process takes to hire a replacement in-house city attorney, this likely will be coming before council seeking additional authority so that I can continue providing interim services until the recruitment process is completed and you have hired your new in-house city attorney. So there are several contracts with Lane Powell for different public works street projects. There are 4 in total. And so each one has its own dedicated page that again sets out the contract authority offset by invoices and then the amount remaining. You can see for the Issaquah Falls City Road project, there is a balance remaining on that one. But as you can see, these are all separated out, and I'm gonna a little bit quickly scroll through these. Here's one for Southeast 4th Street. And then there's a third one for Ebright Creek Fish Passage Project. And then finally, there is one for George Davis Fish Passage Project. And it appears that no work has been done on that, but that authority has been given, and that's just waiting, I think, for the Lane Powell team to activate with the city team on that one. And then, let's see, looking at my notes, there is one more active contract that I wanted to review with you, and that is for—
Carrie, sorry, before you move on, we have a question. Councilmember Moran.
You may have answered it, but are these all active contracts with Lane Powell? These are all still ongoing?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
And then we do have a contract for hearing examiner services. The city's hearing examiner is an administrative law judge, and per Smammish Municipal Code, hears appeals of land use matters, quite a variety of them. And He charges the city for his services at an hourly rate. And you can tell that these invoices are not as consistent as those for criminal services, for example, because it depends on whether or not there was a hearing held or a pre-hearing conference or how much of his time was utilized in the month. And so you can see here that it fluctuates quite a bit. And I'm guessing by September, this larger invoice, there must have been a hearing in July or August that caused that number to be higher. But this is the total amount paid for hearing examiner services for 2021. And that concludes the presentation of the active matters. The spreadsheet does note some inactive matters, but I wasn't planning to present on those because they are inactive.
We've got a few hands up. Councilmember Moran, I'm not sure if your hand is still up or if you have another question.
I don't have a question. I'm just fumbling around with one hand.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Clark.
Sorry, Carrie, to put you on the spot. If you could just go to page 90.
Sure.
And the only question I had on this one is there was no engagement letter, no contract, and I didn't see it above an inactive spreadsheet. Do you have anything else on this? This is completed. We're no longer using their services, or?
So this is inactive. And as you noted, Deputy Mayor Clark, the engagement letter was not finalized. It was drafted and there was no contract. And that is because it was recently decided that the services would no longer be required. And so that's why it's titled under the inactive category.
Who decided that?
So that was a conversation that was held between the city manager, deputy city manager, and myself. And it's based on the reading of Smammish Municipal Code 2.50.010, because it was a contract that was within his authority amount delegated by the council. And so we had a conversation about the fact that the engagement letter was not finalized and whether the services should proceed. And
so you decided we weren't going to have OPMA coverage anymore?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. What was that, Councilmember Moran?
So it was decided that we would not have OPMA coverage.
Well, the way you framed that is interesting, because the draft engagement letter referred to providing coverage for 3 council members originally, and yet the SMC—
due to an OPMA violation.
Excuse me?
Due to PMA violation.
So the SMC contemplates the city manager may enter into contracts if they are on behalf of the city. And so we had a discussion and decided that that contract could, well, it was, first of all, never entered into. There is no contract, but we decided not to proceed with entering into a contract. But of course, paying these invoices.
All right, I did see the letter, but I'm just interested that we've decided that we don't need an OPMA. Okay, thank you.
Well, I do want to add that it's the council, the legislative body, that has the ultimate power to contract and enter into and execute contracts on behalf of the city. So if a majority of this body, the council, chooses to enter into a contract, the council may.
But it is, the way ours is set up is that it is the city manager who has to hire and fire the city attorney. So the council can't do that.
Well, I am working currently as interim under a contract that initially was authorized by the city manager, but ultimately, if additional authority is needed, will need to go to the council. And you are correct that under a council manager plan of government, which is the details of that are spelled out in chapter 35A 13 of the RCW, that it is the city manager as the chief executive officer of the city who has the right to hire and fire department directors. So for the in-house position, how you've characterized it is accurate. I just was making a distinction between in-house and contracted.
Well, I'm just going by an ordinance that was passed back in 2017 by the council that gave the direction to, the council gave the direction to the city manager in an ordinance at that time that said that the city manager, they gave that direction to the city manager that he had the right to do the hiring and firing of the attorneys. So I'm just questioning, I guess I'll have to look to see and somehow if that ordinance has changed.
So Councilmember Moran, I think what you're referring to is the ordinance that adopted the current version of Chapter 2.50 of the Smammish Municipal Code. That is the delegation of authority by the council to the city manager up to $50,000. That's why you often see contracts written for $49,999, because that's the extent of the city manager's delegated authority from the council. So that did happen by ordinance in 2017, but that is different from the RCW provision that allows the city manager under a council manager plan of government to hire and fire department directors. An in-house city attorney typically is considered a department director. And so I was agreeing with you that for the in-house city attorney position, it is up to the city manager with regard to hiring and firing of that position.
Okay, but then it would not be for, so any of the other attorneys that we've had would not have been, those are up to solely the council?
Well, before you had your in-house city attorney, and most recently that was Ms. Marshall, and it's my understanding she's your only in-house city attorney you've ever had, because before that, the city contracted for city attorney services with the Kenyon Deason law firm. And so that was a different scenario, having a contracted city attorney through a firm as compared to an employee, which is the in-house model. I hope that clarifies.
It's just very different from what we've ever been told, but thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any more questions? I want to make sure I've addressed everyone's questions. Well, not seeing any, that really does conclude my presentation this evening. I'll stop screen sharing.
Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate that. Council, are there any additional questions or? Nope. Okay, very good. Carrie, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, it is 9:15 and we have several items left to go and we haven't had a break yet. Would a 5-minute break be in order here before we jump into the next item? Okay, very good. So let's take a 5-minute break, literally 5 minutes. Lita, I just want to make sure before we dive in that cameras are going.
I believe so. I can go back and check, but.
Okay, I just want to make sure before we started. And I think you've got everybody back on here.
Oh yeah, he just came out and he said, yes, we're good.
Perfect, great, thanks so much. Okay, Council, we'll dive into the next item, which is supplemental agreement for Lewis Thompson Road Tightline. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Ellikish, our Public Works Director.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council members, and City Manager. My name is Jeff Ellikish, Public Works Director. First, I'd like to just take a brief moment and introduce Doug Van Gelder as our new City Engineer. He has an amazing bandwidth of related career experiences, having worked both in public sector and private sector for municipalities throughout the Puget Sound region. His duties will include oversight responsibilities of all capital public works projects, as well as public works development review. In the short time that he's been here, he has proven himself to be a difference maker. I'm very excited to have Doug on board. So you'll be seeing more from him in presentations and input as we go forward. The purpose of tonight's agenda item is such that in December, the City Council asked the City Manager to bring back a supplemental agreement to the Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project, the consultant services contract, to potentially add additional sidewalks to the scope of work, namely between 205th Avenue Northeast and East Lake Smammish Parkway. The original project limits for the Tightline project start near 210th Place Northeast, but may also get extended up to 210th at a later date. Tonight's presentation on this agenda item will be led by Ben Russler, our Associate Project Engineer. Ben, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Share my screen. Okay. So if everybody can see my screen, thank you, council members and Madam Mayor. I'm here tonight to seek approval for the Lewis-Thompson Tightline Project Supplement Agreement 01, which is an extension of the design limits to incorporate non-motorized improvements through East Lake Smammish Parkway. Originally, the limits of the project stopped at 205th Avenue Northeast, so this would extend the eastern limit by approximately 350 feet. The Lewis-Thompson Tightline project was identified as the top project in the Zacchaeus Basin Plan that was adopted by City Council in 2019. And the project itself was approved by City Council as a legislative priority for 2021. Being a legislative priority helped the city secure $3 million in ARPA funding through a state appropriation, and the city has secured an additional $592,000 through the King County Flood Control District. The design contract was approved by City Council on December 14th. The contract is with Osborne Consulting and is for design through the 30% design level. The project is intended to mitigate flood and landslide hazards through the corridor by upgrading the ditches and culvert system for up to 0.61 miles Lewis-Thompson to a curb gutter and storm sewer system. The upgrade would increase stormwater capacity, improve water quality prior to flowing into Lake Smammish, install flow control facilities, and reduce erosion. In the Zacchaeus Basin Plan identified 3 schedules for the project. Cost and design exploration of these 3 schedules is how the current contract with Osborne has been structured. Schedule A is the base improvement, and it would install a storm sewer system and water quality treatment from 205th Avenue Northeast to 210th Avenue Northeast. Schedule B would expand on Schedule A and go south to 210th Place Southeast, which would tie into the project limits of the Lewis-Thompson Road Slide Repair and Drainage Improvement Project from 2018. And then Schedule C would add non-motorized improvements to the project, including sidewalks and bike lanes. So following the 10% design estimates, staff and Osborne will be presenting updated and refined costs for each schedule, which will help determine the final project scope and financial needs. And this presentation is planned for May later this year. So the supplement agreement background. So prior to the approval of the design contract, City Council asked staff to look into the cost of extending the non-motorized improvements through East Lake Smammish Parkway. This was originally not in the scope because the project was being looked at through a stormwater first lens with non-motorized improvements accompanying the proposed new curb, gutter, and storm sewer system. East of 205th Avenue on Lewis-Thompson has existing storm pipe infrastructure. Osborne put together an estimate for the additional design through the 30% design level, and their estimate totaled $16,010. This includes 10% and 30% project cost estimates, explorations, design, and technical design memos, with the potential needing to expand the cross-section, triggering evaluation of walls within the corridor. The supplement agreement would increase the total contract to $579,610 plus a 10% project contingency. The work completed under the supplement agreement is non-motorized related, not stormwater, so the funds should come out of the Transportation Capital Improvement Fund, but the Lewis-Thompson Tightline project does not have a specific bars number in the Transportation Capital budget. This was an oversight by me during the mid-budget request. So staff is requesting approval of the supplement agreement through the Sidewalk program because the work is looking at sidewalk improvements and other non-motorized improvements that would typically be explored during a sidewalk cross-section improvement. Currently, there are 2 other projects that plan to use that account in 2022, but only approximately $150,000 is being allocated for work under those projects in the next year. And this request would be $17,611 for the supplement agreement, leaving $232,390 in that specific program. So staff is requesting approval of the supplement agreement of $16,010 plus 10% contingency from the sidewalk program within the Transportation Capital Improvement Fund. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Back to you, Mayor. Go mute.
Thank you. Councilmember Howe.
Just a quick question. As far as when you're talking about sidewalk improvements, are you looking at safety as a key component or a core component when you're talking about, improvements?
Yes, there's no sidewalk. There's no good walking path right now.
I know.
So yes, that would be the non-motorized improvements would include looking at bike lanes and sidewalks to get
and additional mirrors or something. Or I'm just wondering how what's the scope? Can it be pretty broad in terms of recommendations?
I think when we could go to do our community outreach plan and implement that, we'll seek input from the community, and if those are realistic and viable things that we need to consider, we'll explore those possibilities. Putting up mirrors are sometimes advantageous, but they come with other things that need to be dealt with. And so I don't want to speculate tonight what those could be, but I think through the process, we'll have an opportunity to engage the community and see what other things might be possible. But the primary focus is bike lane and or a sidewalk on at least one side in the corridor.
Councilmember Lamb.
We've had a lot of, people commenting on the bike lanes, and a lot of people are pretty happy that we're looking at putting them in. I just had a question about bike lanes in general, particularly when it's on a downgrade. The width, especially, because like on the opposite end at Snake Hill, I knew bike lanes were going in, and I was actually pretty excited. But the bike lanes are so narrow, you can't really bike down them, and plus it's pretty curvy. And this is a similar road in that it is again a downgrade. And I was wondering how wide are the shoulders for the bike lanes to make it safe.
Ben, you might take a stab at that, and then I have some input as well.
Yeah, I believe that the typical bike lane is 5 feet wide. I can definitely share your concern with the design consultant and get their feedback on if they think that we should go wider. But
one of the opportunities, Councilmember Lamb, that we'll have through the through the alternative analysis is what do we do for the downhill slope versus the uphill slope for bike lanes? Can the downhill be a shared lane versus its own, its own separate issue? Plus we have sidewalks, at least on one side. We could be looking at 15 to 20 feet of cutting into one side of the road to make this work. And so it's complicated. It's very, very expensive. We're going to be into trees and walls and all kinds of things. And so it's not an easy solution, but the options and alternatives we intend to bring back once we have those and ask for council to buy off on the project going forward. And that'll be coupled with the community outreach plan as well.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Councilmember Train.
Thank you, Jeff. You just answered one of my questions because I'm looking at the picture and I'm seeing 20 feet and I'm seeing some walls are going to have to be moved or taken out. And if you come back with a design where there's a shared bike lane and then only a bike lane on the I really need, as a biker, I need the bike lane going up the hill. Yep. I can ride with the traffic coming down because that hill I can do 35 miles an hour, not even on an electric bike. And I'm an old man now. But my real question is tonight is just about you guys are asking us for $16,010 to have somebody actually look at and see if this is even feasible, and then they're going to come back based on either our road standards or an alternative with a cost.
That was the commitment that we made to the council for the entire corridor project. We went after a bucket of money for what the original project was, which was a tight line project from point A to point B. And then there was Schedule B that takes it up a little bit further. And then Schedule C is adding non-motorized facilities in that corridor. And then lastly, Schedule D is potentially adding a sidewalk from 205th down to East Lake Smammish Parkway. So tonight's request is $17,000 with contingency, give or take the exact number, to do the cost estimating And then we will bring back all of those options and alternatives for council to confirm what they want to build in 2023 and 24. So tonight is just doing enough engineering to give you cost estimates for us to understand what the potential impacts are, and then how might we pay for those? Because the non-motorized components of this project are in the transportation bucket, not in the stormwater bucket. And so now we have a separate schedule of how we pay for things going forward as well.
And in a sense, in this scope, you're not looking to do any upgrade of this intersection to increase its capacity?
Not from a traffic standpoint, unless that's warranted to do so. But if we need to change the signal timing for more pedestrian phases or those kinds of things, if we go forward with the project in the future, or after we come back with the cost estimates, there might be some recommendations that we need to take a look at. I understand that the county is looking to finish the trail project and the connection, from the trail up to the road, and we need to be cognizant of that, and how does that impact this project, assuming this goes forward.
And then are we also looking at George Davis? Is this George Davis Creek then to the south, and the fish passage for George Davis Creek?
Ben, is that yours?
No. That's a separate project.
George Davis is north. Zakios is south of this intersection.
So the drainage from this tightline project will tie into Zakios Creek.
It ties into Zakios. Okay. Thank you.
So just as an initial blanket statement, I'm very supportive of this. Last year when we brought this up, I can't remember if it was Councilmember Stewart or myself that asked us to add this. But as a pedestrian that uses this street all the time, it just makes intuitive sense to put the sidewalk all the way to the bottom of the hill. That being said, I do have some concerns with widening bike lanes beyond what I think it's AASHTO says that you're supposed to have them, because I do have some concerns. We're going to be adding impervious surface all along here, and we're all draining to Zakios, and I think we have to be conscientious about any additional impervious surface. So I think I would appreciate feedback relative to AASHTO and what they say bike lanes should or should not be, especially when we're looking at it. I mean, I can appreciate Councilmember Lamb's comments because it is a steep hill. And, I guess I would default again to AASHTO on whether or not you should have a separate bike lane versus having your cyclists in the travel lane with no bike lane on the downhill side. My guess is AASHTO says they should probably still have their own lane, but I think that would be of interest to me as to what their standards are.
I think those are great comments, and we'll take those into consideration through the process.
Thanks. Councilmember Moran.
Jeff, I wanted to, I remember, and I wanted to say it was I think it was the Journal American when they were still around, had done some really good articles about widening this road and when they put those walls in. And I remember when they were doing that, they were widening it as wide as they possibly could and putting in, and when they were doing this the first time through, and why they put the walls where they did. And, people were saying, well, why don't you make it wider and you can do this? And there was reasons they made it this wide because they were hoping to do wider at the time. So I would go back and try to find those articles because I know they did it as wide as they thought they could because environmentally at that time. The other thing is I went down and I was, when I was down there, and this was maybe 2 weeks ago, I was down there and I ended up taking a kind of a rolling film of it because it was watching a truck with, I don't remember if it was bark or what it was in the back, but it was coming around from the parkway up this hill. And I have another concern over the fact that when the trucks do that, it's a tight corner for them onto that single lane coming up the hill. And so when we start talking about taking away lane footage of any kind, I have concerns that way as well. So I just want to see, as we're doing that, we may be very limited on how far we can go environmentally because of where those walls are. And I don't know what the cost is going to be there. We may not be able to go too far on those walls. So, you know, knowing all of that, it'd be interesting to see what is the width of some of those trucks that have to use that road.
I think that's a good input, and it's one of the things that we can back check the design standard for that road. We have certain vehicles that have certain dimensions that are needed to be met. If you look in this photo here, you see the stepped lane configuration. That's in part to handle the curve, you know, the vehicles going through. We can double check the auto turns and current standards when we get to that point of the project.
Councilmember Moran, where did you say that article was located?
Oh, sorry, I'm just putzing around here. I believe it was in the Journal American, and I will, you know, I'm just don't have a ton I can do. So I'll putz around looking for it tomorrow as well, because they covered it really well. And there was, you know, I was down there 2 or 3 days in a row when they were putting in these walls, talking to these guys. And there was particular reasons why the walls went in when they did, and, you know, where they did, and they couldn't widen it any further and blah, blah, blah. So it would be interesting to pull back up those articles.
Yeah, thank you.
So council, if there aren't any more hands up, I would certainly entertain a motion on this. Oh, Councilmember Howell?
Yeah, no, that was it. Move to approve.
I'll second. All right, is there any further discussion? And just to clarify for the public and the city clerk's office, this is authorizing the city manager to include supplemental agreement in the additional amount of $16,010, correct?
Plus a contingency.
Plus the 10% design project contingency.
Thank you.
So 17,611.
Thank you.
All right, if there isn't any further discussion, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great, ayes have it, 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, our next item is King County Urban Growth Capacity Study and Countywide Planning Policies Growth Target Update.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. David Pyle and Miriam Leitner will present on this item. We'll get them promoted.
Good evening, Council. David Pyle, Community Development. With me tonight, I have Miriam Leitner, the Community Development Department Planning Manager. So tonight we're here to update you on the City of Smammish growth targets, which have been remanded back to the city for revision by the King County Growth Management Planning Council, also known as GMPC, with a due date for city revision by June 1, 2022. The GMPC anticipates taking this topic up for review at its July meeting this summer. This remand relates to the land capacity section of the Urban Growth Capacity Study, as well as growth targets. So we'll be starting with an overview of both of these topics. Next slide. The topics we'll be covering tonight are both part of a cyclical, statewide, and regional planning process aimed at accommodating growth in a coordinated and intentional way. We've included the years 2015 to 2025 to show the full overview of the various components in the cycle. Note that this graphic is for didactic purposes and is not perfect, so please don't focus too hard on the exact dates. Instead, please focus on how the different processes line up to ultimately result in a final City Council approved comprehensive plan. To the left, you will see our last comprehensive plan adopted by the city in 2015. Since then, the cycle has started again, as it does every 8 years in accordance with state law, starting with the Office of Financial Management regional population projections and followed by initiation of the Urban Growth Capacity Study. The yellow line shows where we currently are in the various processes. As you are aware, we are just now initiating the periodic update of the city's comprehensive plan, and we have our work cut out for us over the next few years. Both the Urban Growth Capacity Study, which is part of the state's Buildable Lands Program, and the periodic update to the comprehensive plan are completed every 8 years. The Growth Management Act requires that the Office of Financial Management provide 20-year growth management planning population projections at least every 5 years. We wanted to highlight the cyclical nature of this process because we think it's an important component to keep in mind as we work together on the topics we will be discussing here tonight. One anomaly in the periodic update cycle that is supposed to happen every 8 years was a change for this cycle made by the legislature in 2020 that moved the due date from 2023 to 2024 under House Bill 2342. So as you can see on the graphic, the cycle doesn't add up to 8 years. This is due to the legislature changing the deadline in RCW 3670A 130 from 2023 to 2024. With that, I'll hand it over to Miriam to talk about the Urban Growth Capacity Study.
Thanks, David. I am working off of one screen tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera to spare you all from watching me read. But please feel free to jump in if you have any questions as I go. Okay. So tonight I'm going to be giving a high-level overview of the King County Urban Growth Capacity Study, focusing primarily on Phase 4, which relates to the final land capacity. Phase 4 integrates data from the other phases of the Urban Growth Capacity Study, and while we're not looking at those phases tonight, we are happy to provide that information to anyone who's interested. I do want to note that the King County Urban Growth Capacity Report has already been finalized and adopted by the Growth Management Planning Council, so we're not reopening the urban growth capacity data. The reason that we're including the Urban Growth Capacity Study tonight is that the final land capacity data from Phase 4 is one of the factors that you'll be considering as you're reevaluating the growth targets. The Urban Growth Capacity Study was a very intensive project that started in early 2019 and continued through 2021. King County rolled out the work in 4 different phases, which you see on screen. The majority of the work involved data gathering and analysis. However, Phase 4 was more discretionary. And some of you will remember our meeting last year when we discussed market factor and employment density and then asked council for direction on those issues. The different capacity phases can be a little confusing to differentiate, so we created this visual to try to help explain things. So we started with data from King County that included all Smammish parcels based on 2019 King County assessor data. And then in Phase 2, we removed critical areas and areas with major barriers to sewer access. And we also removed land considered less likely to redevelop, such as parks, schools, golf courses, and other categories. Then in Phase 3, we reduced land capacity by applying a percentage discount for public purpose areas like stormwater facilities, as well as right-of-way areas. And then finally, in Phase 4, we reduced the land capacity for a final time with market factor to reflect landowner preference not to develop or the inability to develop. Employment density, a ratio of square feet per job, was also applied to commercial areas to identify the number of jobs likely to be produced. It's also really important to know about the general approach of the King County Urban Growth Capacity Study before we jump into the data. The Urban Growth Capacity Study utilized a process directed by King County to better compare jurisdictions. So all of the steps that I just described on the last slide were done using step-by-step guidance and direction provided by King County. The data provided to cities or provided by cities back to King County was designed to contribute to a high-level discussion around growth and not to be a parcel-by-parcel study. Cities were also directed to use reliable existing data and not to create new data. So a lot of the Urban Growth Capacity Study data comes from the King County Assessor's Office and the attributes provided by the assessor. The data that informed land capacity was provided to us from King County and was assessor data pulled in June of 2019. The Urban Growth Capacity Study required cities to identify infrastructure gaps, and to obtain this information, Smammish worked with a consultant to design and distribute a survey to the utility districts, the school district, and the city's public works department. Their responses informed the infrastructure gaps that were included in phase 2 of the urban growth capacity study, as well as those considered when we were talking about market factor. As some of you will remember from when we presented to you last spring, Sammamish's urban growth capacity study was significantly impacted by a change in sewer capacity from Sammamish Plateau water. Smammish Plateau water initially responded to our survey in June of 2020, reporting that aside from specific geographic areas, there were no major gaps that would affect developability of land. This information was integrated into our phase 2 work and submitted to King County the following month. In December of 2020, Sammamish Plateau Water amended the survey response, identifying a major sewer service gap that affected the developability of land. The city notified King County and provided a memo with updated data in January. And then Sammamish Plateau Water issued a sewer moratorium on new construction on February 22nd of 2021. The updated sewer capacity data was integrated into phase 4 data and the previous phases as well, and provided to King County in early March of 2021, marking the end of the city's role related to the urban growth capacity study. The urban growth capacity study then moved on to King County review and eventual adoption by the Growth Management Planning Council later that summer. You're going to see timelines similar to this throughout our presentation tonight because we think it helps give some context to the work that we're going to be going through. So as a reminder, the strategy for sewer service delivery in the Sammamish Plateau Water Sewer Comprehensive Plan aligns with the construction of a north diversion project promised by King County to connect Sammamish Plateau Water north to Brightwater. King County had historically included construction of the north diversion in the King County Capital Improvement Plan, as well as their budget, but the county then removed the north diversion project due to changing priorities. Without the north diversion, the Sammamish Plateau Water Sewer Comprehensive Plan was void, and Sammamish Plateau Water was out of sewer capacity. You can see here on the map that everything in the pink area relates to the north diversion, and this is the area that the city had to remove from the urban growth capacity study last spring. After integrating the data from Sammamish Plateau Water, we found that approximately 96 of the impacted parcels had already been removed during the previous phases of the analysis. However, the 4% that remained dramatically impacted our capacity, as you can see summarized on screen. So now comes the fun part. The sewer capacity changes were integrated into the urban growth capacity study, and the final work was being done in phase 4. Again, phase 4 looked at final capacity, and this is the information that we're now going to be updating to help with your consideration of revised growth targets. So for this reason, we wanted to spend a little more time tonight going over what the final capacity numbers were before we update them, so that you have a strong foundation for our future meetings. So we're starting tonight with residential capacity, and there's a lot of math, so please feel free to ask clarifying questions as we go or at the end. So the formula used to calculate final residential capacity is shown on screen. You start with your initial capacity, which is the assumed density for each zone based on the code. You then multiply that by your land supply area, which is your developable and redevelopable land, with reductions for right-of-way, public purpose areas, and market factor. Then you add your initial capacity to any development currently in the pipeline, which came from our phase 2 work. And I wanted to just take a little bit of time to dive deeper into our pipeline units here. So King County's guidance for pipeline development was to include parcels where large known future development was located. Based on that guidance, staff pulled preliminary plats and preliminary short plats, as well as a unified zone development plan that were under review but not yet finalized by April of 2020, which was when we were working on phase 2. The pipeline development data was to be pulled at a point in time and not continually updated throughout the rest of the project. However, we did update some of the unit counts for pipeline data during phase 4 with permission from King County to help ensure that phase 4 was going to be accurate. So once you add in the pipeline development, you then subtract out any existing dwelling units, and this is using King County assessor data, and that gives you the final capacity. And here is what our results look like. If you're like me, you're probably attempting to do the math and totaling the bottom and realizing it doesn't completely add up. and I'm going to explain why that is. So there are two zones, R12 and R18, where the residential capacity was negative. The structures in these two zones were built at a higher density than the current code allows. And so King County recommended converting the negative capacity to zero capacity for these zones because it's unlikely that anything would be redeveloped into fewer units. So once this was all done, we ended up with a final residential capacity of 1,144 housing units. Are there any questions on that before I move on? I know that was a lot. Okay, I'll still be here. It's okay. So now we're going to move on to employment capacity. The formula is very similar, only instead of housing units, you're looking at square feet because this relates to commercial space. You again start with your initial capacity and you add in any development currently in the pipeline when the report was done. Then you're going to subtract out any existing buildings on those parcels, which again comes from assessor data, and you get the final employment capacity in square feet. I do want to just highlight for the pipeline data here, we're looking at commercial development from the Unified Zone Development Plan. And we also, during our re-review of the data for phase 4, realized that we had left out a new school as well as a school expansion. And those were pretty critical because they do result in job capacity. So we talked with King County and those were added in as well. So the last step to getting to our final employment capacity comes to dividing the final employment capacity by the employment density, which you'll see noted on screen as square feet per job. These were our results. So based on historical data provided by King County's consultant, we knew that most commercial areas in Smammish run at about 370 square feet per job. The consultant also supplied a ratio for the schools in the pipeline, so that's been included here in the R6 zone. You'll notice on this chart that the office zone had negative job capacity, and again, this is due to existing structures being built to a higher density than the current code allows. The negative capacity was converted to zero based on the recommendation of King County. We also initially showed negative capacity in the community business zone. So King County staff asked us to apply the formula for final employment capacity individually to each of the 25 parcels that had been determined to be developable or redevelopable in the community business zone. And then to remove any parcels that were showing negative capacity after we did that. So of the 25 parcels in the community business zone, only 3 had positive capacity when we were done applying the formula, and these were totaled and entered into the table. So when all of this was done, we ended up with a final employment capacity of 305 jobs. So that concludes my very brief overview of the urban growth capacity study. I just wanted to check in and see if there's any questions before I hand things over to David to talk about growth targets.
Don't see any.
Okay, David, it's all yours.
Thank you, Miriam. And we're moving along at a pretty fast clip here. So keep in mind that we do have 2 additional meetings scheduled on this topic. One additional meeting in February and another one in March. So if there are questions that come up, we do have additional screen time where we can talk through these items.
David, sorry, I was just going to say, before you jump into this, we need to extend our meeting. Council, we need a motion to extend. It's 9:58.
All motion to extend is 11 late enough?
Hopefully, we can always extend beyond that if needed.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 5-1, we have extended till 11 p.m. David, sorry about that. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor. The King County countywide planning policies growth target setting process is a collaborative effort between jurisdictions in the same geography categories. Next slide. Cities receive 2 growth targets from King County, one for housing units and one for jobs. Keep in mind that the growth targets are King County's growth targets that are represented through the King County countywide planning policies that the city is required to conform to in writing its comprehensive plan. These targets actually start with population projection from Washington State Office of Financial Management, or OFM. For King County, these population projections are then applied using the regional growth strategy from the Puget Sound Regional Council, PSRC, Vision 2050 plan, which you see on screen. It's important to note that Smammish falls into the cities and towns category. We're going to clarify what that means as it relates to the growth target. Note that there are primarily 5 geography categories: metro cities, core cities, high-capacity transit communities, cities and towns, and urban unincorporated areas. Next slide. The reason why Smammish's placement in the cities and towns categories is important is due to the amount of growth that is anticipated to be directed to cities and towns. This slide shows the percentage of growth that each regional geography in King County will be taking. You can see with the metro cities, 44% of growth is directed towards those cities. Core cities, 40%. High capacity transit cities, 11%. And due to the attributes of Smammish, we're in the cities and towns category where we are slated to be partner in 5% of the growth. Next slide, please. The numbers shown here are from the November 2nd, 2020 presentation done by King County staff. This presentation is linked in your agenda bill. You can see that at this time, the cities and towns category, of which Smammish was part of, was allocated through Vision 2050 to receive 14,000 housing units and almost 13,000 jobs. These are important numbers that we will be revisiting later in this presentation. Next slide, please. There are 19 member cities in the cities and towns category. To determine how growth was to be allocated across the 19 member cities, King County formed a geographic caucus group and requested participation by the member cities. There were a total of 6 caucus meetings held between October of 2020 and March of 2021 that included the 19 cities and towns. Not all of the 19 cities and towns participated in the caucus meetings, and some participated at times when they were available. The majority of the meetings focused on alignment of understanding around the countywide planning policies and on comparable attributes such as land area and past targets. At the February 23rd meeting, the group had a specific conversation about preliminary growth target numbers, with most cities providing a preliminary proposed number. At the March 10, 2021 meeting, cities were asked to present their position on proposed housing and job growth targets for finalization of the draft targets for inclusion in the larger CPP efforts. Next slide, please. This slide shows the final capacity from the Urban Growth Capacity Study as transmitted to King County in March of 2021. This number excludes lands affected by the Smammish Plateau Water and Sewer District moratorium, which we'll get to shortly. Also shown is the city's original position leading up to the March 10, 2021 caucus meeting, and the revised position following the March meeting, which was transmitted to King County staff on March 17, 2021, following the city direction following City Council direction given at the March 16, 2021 City Council meeting. So in summary, regarding the City and Towns Caucus, it's important to note that the 14,000 units that is the equivalent of 5% of King County's regional growth was to be distributed between the 19 member cities. And of that, there was, in order to get to that 14,000 units, there was a negotiated process between the 19 cities where each city discussed where it stood with infrastructure adequacy, where it stood with desire to grow, and its position and access to things like state highways or freeways and other resources. And through that conversation, we found that with some give and take that we were able to overshoot the 14,000 units. Next slide, please. After caucus initiations were initially approved, Smammish had a growth target of 700 units and 305 jobs. You'll notice that the total for the group far exceeds the 14,000 housing units and almost 13,000 jobs that were initially proposed for the geography category as highlighted by the King County staff presentation last fall. It's important also to note that we've asked King County and PSRC what happens if a caucus overshoots its allocation. And they indicated that it is acceptable for a caucus to overshoot its allocation However, it is unacceptable for a caucus to come up short in its allocation. So for the caucus to exceed the 14,000 units is not a problem. However, if the caucus was to come up short on the 14,000 units, that would be a problem, and there would need to be further negotiation and discussion between the member cities. Next slide, please. Going back to what Miriam was saying related to timing, here you can see how the growth target process overlapped with the urban growth capacity study. The revised Smammish Plateau Water and Sewer District data, which identified a gap in infrastructure, which is the source of the moratorium, was provided to the city just as the growth caucuses were starting and the targets were set and sent to the Growth Management Planning Council and other King County groups for review and approval while the sewer moratorium was in effect. Essentially, this is a situation of bad timing where we wrapped up our urban growth capacity study and sent it off for final approval and entered into the growth caucus setting process, all while we were in a moratorium with Smammish Plateau Water and Sewer District related to the North Diversion Project, only to find out that that was then later canceled or was allowed to expire in August after we'd already closed out the caucus meetings and after the GMPC had already reviewed and approved the growth targets. Now I'll provide an update on what has changed since March of 2021. Picking where we, next slide, please. Picking where we left off previously, the Smammish Urban Growth Capacity Study concluded with final transmittal to King County on March 9 of 2021. Meanwhile, the Smammish Plateau Water and Sewer District moratorium continued until August 24, 2021, long after the GMPC had wrapped up approval of the Urban Growth Capacity Study and CPP growth targets and had sent it off to King County Council for review and approval. Smammish Plateau Water and Sewer District provided a third update to the infrastructure survey on September 27, 2021, removing the gap identified in the December 11, 2020 survey response where the gap was first identified. The King County Council Mobility and Environment Committee took up review of the Growth Management Planning Council approved urban growth capacity study in October of 2021 and was notified of the change in sewer information by interested parties. The King County Council Mobility and Environment Committee remanded the Smammish countywide planning policy growth targets back to the Growth Management Planning Council, who in turn remanded it back to the city. The motion of remand is included in your agenda packet. I believe it's Exhibit 6. The King County Council approved the CPPs without a growth target for Smammish. King County Council Mobility and Environment Committee remanded the Smammish countywide planning policies back to the GM. Oh, excuse me, that I already went through that. So we're currently in a position where, based on this motion of remand that was approved by the King County Growth Management Planning Council, the city has until June 1st of 2022 to complete work in updating the urban growth capacity study to add back in the area that was previously excluded due to the sewer moratorium, consider the change in land capacity, and consider whether or not the city council wants to take a different position on growth targets. So we have a work plan set out, and Miriam will be talking more about this, where we will be going through the steps to get there. But first I wanted to show a slide that shows the effect that this has on the cities and towns caucus growth targets. You can see that by removal of the 700 units of residential growth, the cities and towns caucus still overshoots the 14,000 target by 1,400 units. So there will need to be additional conversation with the caucus as we proceed here. That is written into our overall approach, and we'll get to that here in a second. And with that, I'll pass it off to Miriam, who's going to talk about the approach and the schedule.
Thanks, David. So as David mentioned, we will need to revise our growth targets by June of this year, and there's a lot of work to be done over a short period of time. So we wanted to close with an overview of what that's going to look like. So we are currently working with Smammish Plateau Water to get updated data related to sewer capacity. We met with them a few weeks ago to discuss what needs to be reviewed, and we're meeting with them later this week to review the findings. Once that data is ready, I'll integrate that into the urban growth capacity study data and then rerun our numbers to get updated land capacity. When we share the updated numbers with you, we'll also be revisiting market factor and going over some recent legislation related to housing for you all to consider as you start to think about how the growth target should be revised. Then we'll be asking you to identify proposed revised growth targets based on the updated information. And staff will go and present the updated data on land capacity and the proposed growth targets to the King County Interjurisdictional Team and the King County Growth Management Planning Council to get their input before coming back to council to share the feedback received and then finalize the proposed revised growth targets. As you can see, this work involves many meetings throughout the spring and summer. In addition to meeting regularly with council, we have several check-ins with the King County Interjurisdictional Team, or IJT, as you see on screen, as well as the King County Growth Management Planning Council, or GMPC. In addition to the meetings listed here, we'll also be meeting with Smammish Plateau Water, as we mentioned, as well as a regional coalition for housing, ARCH cities, to ensure that our regional partners know what we're proposing. I wanted to note that although King County Council required that Smammish revise its growth targets by June 1st so that the GMPC could take action at its June 22nd meeting, King County staff notified the city that there is no June meeting. So staff will be presenting the initially proposed targets to the GMPC in April, and then coming back with the final proposed targets on July 27th. These dates have been set in close coordination with King County, and our work plan was presented to the King County IJT on January 21st and has been confirmed as acceptable. So our next meeting with you all will be on February 15th, and this is where we're going to be sharing the updated land capacity data, looking at market factor, and going over housing-related legislation to tee up the conversation we'll be having on March 1st. On March 1st, we'll be asking City Council to consider the revised information, the changes in market, changes in legislation, and decide what appropriate new growth targets should be for the city for 2019 to 2044. There are several videos of previous meetings linked in tonight's agenda bill. I believe it's exhibits 1 and 2. And those might be helpful to watch as you're starting to prepare for the March 1st meeting. So with that, that concludes our presentation for this evening. So I'm going to hand things back to the mayor in case there's any questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Howe.
Just quickly, was anyone else remanded? Any of the other cities that were listed on that list? How fixed are their targets? Are they in stone for the other cities?
So those other cities' targets were adopted by the King County Council in December through the adoption of the CPPs by the King County Council. So in order for those targets to come down, if you will, then that would require action by the King County, the GMPC first, and then the King County Council. They did indicate, and this was a big question that we had for them, is what happens if the overrun of more than 2,000 units increases to an overrun of 3,000 or 4,000 units? And the answer from King County and from the PSRC was that that's not a problem. Again, planning appropriately for growth is really important, and that if some of the smaller cities are indicating that they are planning for more growth, then that is because they have reason to do so. That they believe the market will be causing that growth, or that they are planning for infrastructure development. Some cities like Carnation, trying to remember the list. I have to go back to the list. But if you go back to the list and you see some of the cities that you would think of as smaller, that have a very large number, there's reason why they're planning for that growth. So I think the county was kind of surprised that we overshot, and PSRC was surprised, but they said that's not really a problem for us to overshoot in that manner.
Thank you.
Councilmember Treen.
So then, David Pileben, the reverse would also be true. Then, if Smammish doesn't overshoot, but the whole caucus is already overshot, then it seems to me we could even go lower than 700. I mean, why would we go in and present some number that is, you know, doing even more?
So the one thing to keep in mind is that growth targets are exactly that. It's a target. There could be more growth, there could be less growth. It really depends. There's a whole host of factors. It's kind of like, you know, me trying to get home at the end of the day after work and saying, hey, I'm going to be home at 5, but the other people on the freeway have a different idea. You know, so it really depends on a whole host of factors. And we can't predict the future, but what we can do is look at what land capacity we have available and get a better understanding about what might happen over a period of time through 2044. And the one thing to keep in mind is that growth targets don't work like a debit card. If you're you know, if you had $2,000 in your bank account and you were at the grocery store and your grocery bill exceeded $2,000, you wouldn't be able to make the transaction with a debit card because the debit card would stop working at $2,000. That's not the case with growth targets. If we set a growth target at 700 units and we reached that growth target within a few years and development kept happening, we could not stop development because we had met our growth target. It really is a benchmark that you're trying to use to gauge how much infrastructure you should be building and how many amenities you should be providing in the community to ensure that when the growth arrives, there is adequate infrastructure on hand to provide for that growth.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to make an additional comment, which is I think that's the key here, is that if we undershoot what we estimate will actually come into the city, we would be doing ourselves a disservice when it comes to the comprehensive plan when we start doing the transportation element of that comp plan, is that you want that to marry up with what actually ends up being constructed in the city, lest we exacerbate traffic problems. Councilmember Howe.
I just had a question around the 305 jobs. Is there any idea what those jobs are? Are they people that live here that have those jobs? Is there really much detail around that number?
Planning number.
That's a really good. Oh,
go ahead, Miriam. Yeah, go ahead. I'll defer to Miriam on that one.
So that's a really good question. So most of our commercial capacity and employment capacity was tied to a couple of our strip mall areas, aside from the school. So we know school capacity and kind of what that will look like.
Right.
We anticipated that if those areas were to get redeveloped, the retail would probably stay more or less the same in terms of types of services. I can't answer the question right now because I don't know the information in terms of the split of who's working there currently and how many are Smammish residents or not. But I think what's going to be interesting as we start to look at the sewer capacity data is that should add some more parcels in those zones coming back online and into capacity. So it'll be interesting to look in a couple of weeks and see how that has shifted and changed. But I anticipate that there will be some more jobs potentially coming online through that.
And one point of conversation that we had at some of the technical meetings with King County was regarding how you measure jobs that are for people who work remotely. So Smammish has seen a surge in jobs if you consider people who have transitioned from a traditional workspace to an at-home work environment. But those are likely not measured under this traditional methodology that King County is using that requires that you have a brick and mortar space to anchor those jobs. So that this is something that is being considered on a regional level right now, where there's conversations about how to measure jobs in a new environment where people are working from home 100% of the time. Is that job actually in the city where they're working, or is it that job actually, you know, are those jobs measured that for people that work at Microsoft that might work from home 95% of the time? Are those measured in Smammish or are those measured in Redmond?
Right. I'll be looking for more granularity around the data. So that's where I'll be doing a lot of my digging. Thank you.
Councilmember Lamb.
How does affordable housing fit into this context of 700 homes?
So that's a great question. As part of the Growth Management Planning Council's deliberations regarding the countywide planning policies, they took up the issue of what is the forecasted need for affordable housing? And they really wanted to understand how that married up with or meshed up with the growth targets that the cities were putting into countywide planning policies. And they identified that they needed to defer that conversation until state information was available later this year in 2022 regarding forecasted need of affordable housing units on a regional level. And then the GMPC Affordable Housing Committee is going to be working on disaggregating that data and figuring out a methodology for how each city should calculate what the forecasted need is for affordable housing. And then the Affordable Housing Committee is going to make recommendation to the Growth Management Planning Council in 2023 regarding possible amendments to the countywide planning policies, which likely will include requirements around how cities plan for affordable housing and how we do forecasting and what we need to include in our comprehensive plans. That information is likely to be available to the city in late 2023, which makes it very challenging for us because our deadline for updating our comprehensive plan is in June of 2024. So we're going to have a bit of a fire drill in the end of 2023 in figuring out how to integrate any new CPPs and any new information from the state also into our comprehensive plan. We are working closely with King County, and we have been pressing King County to give us a framework about what we might expect so that we can start to build out any updates to our comprehensive plan so that it's easy to accommodate those changes at a last minute. We want to make sure that our comprehensive plan is on schedule and on budget, but most importantly is consistent with King County countywide planning policies and is getting it right in the regional framework.
Okay, thank you.
I would also just add to that we did recently get a grant awarded from the Washington State Department of Commerce to look at affordable housing and housing diversity within the city, and that will feed into our comp plan update. So I think while it won't completely solve the issue of that hustle that David was mentioning in 2023, we will be a little bit better prepared, hopefully, too.
Okay, I just wasn't aware, like how numbers of affordable housing, like who decides that?
So that will be coming from the King County Growth Management Planning Council, and we're waiting for that. We all want to know because we want to get started in our comp plan. That's a big topic, and so we're going to be following it really closely, working with King County, and we'll provide updates to the council as we learn more. We'll make sure to keep you informed.
Thank you for that.
I don't see any additional hands up. So David or Miriam, I don't know if you have anything to close us out, but if not, thank you.
Thank you for taking in all that information. It's a lot. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us. Like Miriam said, highly recommend watching some of it, at least starting early on with this process and watching the background information for the urban growth capacity study and the countywide planning policies. We've provided, to help facilitate that, we've provided the date, the timestamp in each video recording, so you can fast forward to that. I also recommend when you're using YouTube, you can speed up the replay speed to 1.25 or 1.5, which tends to get you through it a little bit faster. So that's another tip as well.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, council, next item is a discussion on revising city contracting processes to encourage minority and women-owned and disadvantaged small businesses.
Thank you, Mayor. Deputy City Manager Scott McCall is prepared to do a presentation on that matter.
Good evening, council. So you just had a lot of presentation, and this is really more of a conversation. This is a follow-up to Councilmember Howe's request as part of the January 18th discussion on the, I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm going to read it, Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update RFP. And the request was made at that time to add language around reaching out to women and minority businesses as part of the RFP process, and Councilmember Howe's request to expand that out. And so bringing this back for discussion from council and looking for council policy direction for us to take that and look at the rest of our contracting processes and come back with a plan for how we're going to implement. Just wanted to say that I think from the staff perspective, we're excited to do this. We just needed a little bit more time to be able to make sure we have a lot of different federal, state, local requirements, and wanted to make sure that we were doing it all right and that we had legal review and that we're not causing any unintended consequences. So Councilmember Howe, I don't know if you wanted to follow up on that and talk a little bit more about what you're proposing and then looking for council direction.
Thank you. If you don't mind, Mayor Malchow, I just talked to this very briefly. Just a thank you for being excited about this. And thank you, fellow council members, for being excited about this. I'm delighted that there's been the support for it. It does mean extra work for staff. I know it does, because part of this is you have to measure. You have to measure. So you measure what matters. And if you don't measure, it doesn't matter. And so we'll be able to hopefully keep track of how are we doing with diversity and inclusion in terms of our contractors and their subs. At some point, we may look at adding even stronger language than what I've proposed, but for right now, I'd be thrilled to death if we could just take what we have and make it better, and make it stronger, more effective. And I'll just point out briefly that Osborne Consulting is led by a bunch of women. It was originally started by a woman and has diversified to, I think the employees own it now too. So we have a good start, and there's a lot further we can go, but by bringing this diversity and this different voice into our community, we're going to get better work. We're going to get really good work. So just tying it into our DEI stuff is going to be terrific. So thank you for working on this. I appreciate it.
Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you if there's any other questions or comments from the rest of the council.
Council, I'm turning it back over to you. You have questions, comments? Councilmember Lamb?
And it's just a comment that I'm really glad to see staff working on this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I would just look for just council blessing, if you will, approval of the policy direction to direct the city manager and staff to go forth and do this work. So I think just a simple motion would probably do the trick, but just so that we're clear on what we're doing.
I'd like to move that that the Smammish city staff are able to do their due diligence and come up with a really terrific plan for us to proceed with, to include diversity and inclusion in our contracting language as it is appropriate.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilmember Howe, do you want to speak to your motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, our city attorney just threw her hand up right in the middle of that. I'm assuming she wanted to catch us before we're voting.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Just a quick technical correction to say that the motion should be framed to direct the city manager to do it, because council can only direct the manager. Sorry. I didn't get my hand up fast enough. I apologize.
Then I'd like to ask the city manager to please undertake taking a look at our inclusion policy to add it to our contracts so that we're looking at women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses to expand our diversity.
Okay.
Supplier diversity. There we go.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay. Can I explain why?
No, because we've already, no, that was during the discussion part.
You guys, yeah, all right.
Okay. By a vote of 4-1, the motion carries.
Thank you, Council.
Okay. And for council, if it helps, since our city attorney jumped in, if you check agenda bills where it says in the block where it says needed from council, there's like wonderful language that will function as a motion. So I move the council direct the city manager to have the staff review, just as a caveat. So she, it's a cheat sheet thing. Okay, so next item, I need to go back to.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
For that last item, you announced the vote as 4-1.
Yes, Karen Moran was off and now she's back on, but she did not participate in that vote. She's back on.
I did.
I just wanted to clarify the vote tally.
Okay, I didn't see her on the screen at all. So Karen, I don't know how you voted then.
I did. Yeah, I was in favor.
Okay, so then 5-1.
I really am trying to stick it out.
Okay, you disappeared off the screen. So, and you'd said in the chat that you were going to jump off. So I assumed you were gone. Okay, maybe if you can announce if you do jump off, just announce that way.
Yeah, that was a computer thing that was up.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to get back to the agenda here. I think this is where we have, yes. Okay, so this is where we have the addition of the new business item. On a violation of the rules 2.71. Councilmember Lamb, you added this, so I'm going to turn this over to you.
Yeah. I wanted to discuss a council member violation of Council Rule 2.7, conduct outside of council meetings. Let me just read for the public what 2.7 is. It addresses personal attacks and negative comments. It states, while policy disagreements are acceptable, council members should refrain from personal attacks or other personal negative comments about fellow council members, city staff members, or the city as a whole. Violation of this section may result in an admonishment or other sanction by majority vote of the other members of the city council. I bring this, did somebody say something? Oh. I bring this up because I think it's important that we abide by council rules and that we are accountable for our actions. Council members are all aware that Council Member Moran has posted negative and disparaging comments about another council member on Facebook. The most recent was on Sunday on the public Facebook group, Smammish Central. As an elected official, I think this behavior is unacceptable. And it reflects poorly on city council and it reflects poorly on the city as a whole. And so I'd like to have a discussion on what consequences are there for violating this council rule.
So Councilmember Lamb, I don't have any hands up relative to that. Maybe the city attorney can guide us based on the language there to kind of help.
So Mayor and council members, as Councilmember Lamb read, your own council rule procedure 2.7.1 does state in the last sentence Violation of this section may result in an admonishment or other sanction by majority vote of the other members of the city council. And my understanding is this was brought forward for discussion tonight. And with that, is there any discussion by the council? Those are spelled out in your rules as potential consequences of a violation of the rule.
Councilmember Howe.
So I'd like to ask a question of our attorney. I'd like to understand, I mean, there's a lot of Facebook groups, and I'm trying to pull myself out of private groups. Would that be a recommendation that really one thing to do is to just start pulling out of private Facebook groups, in particular ones that are politically activated? That would be a question. The other piece is that, you know, I am disappointed to see disparaging remarks of other council members, and I am not perfect. And there are many people that will attest to that. But I'm going to try to work really hard to always be civil, to no matter the circumstance, always be civil. For me, I'm not as interested in a slap on the wrist or a fine or a sanction. I'm more interested in a change in behavior. I care about outcomes. I care about let's just do better going forward. That personally, that's where I land on this. And I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but I would love to see an end to personal attacks. I think we're all better. We're all better than that.
So briefly, trying to answer Councilmember Howe's question. You know, it's an individual choice for each council member whether to continue to participate in social media platforms. Some cities, their legislative bodies have adopted a policy regarding social media. That's an option, and I can provide sample policies from other jurisdictions if there's interest there. You know, again, just because you become an elected official does not mean you forfeit your First Amendment rights. You all have free speech, but you also have these rules of procedure. And it does start off saying, well, policy disagreements are acceptable, right? And so it's all about how it's framed. And the intent behind this rule appears to be to frame disagreements in a civil, professional manner that isn't disparaging and casting, you know, people in a negative or disparaging light. So that's how I read the plain language of this rule. And again, it's your personal choice whether to participate in social media. I would advise all of you when doing so to please distinguish your personal opinions from those of the council as a body, right? Because people who may know you're a council member, that distinction needs to be made really clear, that you're speaking your personal opinion and not on behalf of this body. Thank you.
I don't, oh, okay, Councilor,
I'll just do one.
I was gonna go with Deputy Mayor Clark. She hasn't had an opportunity to talk yet. I'll start back to you then.
Sorry, I just wanted to applaud Councilmember Lamb. This is a super hard topic to bring up. So thank you for bringing this up in the open so we can all kind of talk about it. And I kind of like Councilmember Howe agree. I would love just all of it to end. So I'm not necessarily looking for like a sanction or anything for me personally. I just want to say, yeah, thank you for bringing this up. And it is really important that we all hold each other accountable. So I really appreciate this.
Councilmember Howe, did you have any additional? No. Okay. Okay, so if there are no additional comments, let's move on our agenda, and that would be under council reports. I have a lengthy report there, and I have revised it several times. I apologize, including one that came late this afternoon that you all got at least over email, but the general public does not have. And part of that included a PDF, which I understand from the city clerk did not come through, but I'd sent it earlier in the day. And that is the letter that came out of the mayor's legislative caucus meeting. And that is that mid-session letter. And I did forward you the final draft. And just to frame this discussion, they were trying to get it to the legislators today. So I did tell them, I said, hey, we have not had a chance to talk about it. We're talking about it tonight. They did say, yes, we will wait for Smammish. We do not have the ability to change this letter to much degree, if at all, because then they'd have to circle back to every jurisdiction. So it's kind of a, we either sign on or we don't sign on scenario here, because there's not time for all the other jurisdictions to then go back and decide whether or not they're going to sign on to it. So I wanted to clarify that. I know there may be some questions relative to that, but I just wanted to kind of frame that up. Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, I'm okay with signing on to the letter. Thanks.
Do you want to make that a formal motion so we can vote on it? Because I think that's what we're going to need here.
All right, I'll make a motion that to sign on to the letter that is being presented by, help me out, Chrissy, who's it?
Issaquah wrote the letter. So it was done under the mayor's office in Issaquah. And then the city of Duval has also added their name today. I got that email. So it's...
Do you know if all the cities signed on?
You had that email that showed which cities had signed on and which they had not heard from. That was this morning. Duval subsequently emailed and said they were signing on. I have not heard if the other jurisdictions have or have not. And I don't know that they would have responded on a reply all or directly back to the city of Issaquah, who was inquiring about whether or not we were signing on. Councilmember Treen, you still have your hand up.
Yeah, I was trying to look for your email so I could make a better motion.
Okay, I can try and see what
the motion is to sign on to the letter.
Okay.
Here.
I sent it to you at 8:08 this morning.
Got it.
And if we want, I can read it into the record if council would like me to, so that the public knows what we're talking about. Okay, I'm seeing Councilmember Howe nodding her head. Okay, I need to make this much bigger than it is. So representatives and senators, to our legislative representatives, thank you for your service to our communities and all the long hours you put in during the interim and when the legislature is in session. We know how hard this work is and appreciate your efforts to take the feedback we provide on our priorities and community needs and to work on the behalf of your district cities. As we approach the midpoint of the 2022 session, we thought we would share with you some feedback on issues that are critical to our cities that we would like to work on with you as the session progresses. One, headed in the right direction. We are pleased with the proposed investments in behavioral and mental health services. Thank you for advocating so strongly to provide additional resources in your districts. As you well know, this kind of support helps individuals and families work on the root causes of issues that significantly impact their ability to live healthy and productive life. We'd also like to thank you for the work we are seeing with proposed amendments to police reform legislation passed in 2021. We can tell that you listened, and while we believe progress is being made, there is more work to be done to get to the level of clarity as cities need for our police departments to address the unintended consequences with the original legislation. And third, we are encouraged to see new investments in our natural areas, providing salmon habitat improvements and fish passage investments. These are crucial to maintaining the wonderful Northwest environment we are also fortunate to live in, causing significant concerns. The proposed missing middle housing legislation is very concerning to our cities. Those of us at the edge of the urban growth area or in the non-contiguous UGA do not support any of the proposals moving forward in their current form. While the issue with preemption local land use decision is of high concern, we are looking to focus your attention on provision to provide infrastructure support critical to increase density. The infrastructure to support density at the edge of the boundary and beyond is just not there. With the lack of significant investments in transportation, We are already seeing the impactful congestion that results when growth exceeds our system's capacity to serve commuters and residents. Transportation and land use cannot be separated from a planning perspective and must move hand in hand. We need state investment in transportation before additional density can be supported. This is most evident at the boundary of the UGA, where congestion is crippling and non-auto transportation options are not yet available. In all our city's legislation agendas, which you have, we stress as a top priority investments in transportation. SR 18, Highway 202, 203, I-90, over and undercrossing, Snoqualmie Valley Parkway, multimodal options, bus rapid transit, and light rail, and the list goes on. For most of us, this is the top priority and the largest challenge facing our cities. It is concerning that any land use mandates could be proposed without the necessary investments in our network and services. We strongly urge you to reject these proposals. Some of the cities signed on here have stated these concerns in separate correspondence already, but we feel you should hear collectively from those in your legislative district that we are all expressing the same concerns. Candace Bach, AWC, has also corresponded in great detail to the legislature on the complexity and concerns this organization has with the proposals, as we would like to echo and support AWC's position. Please feel free to continue the great dialogue we will be having over the last many months, and reach out if you have any questions that we can answer and can provide any information or concerns. Thank you for all your work. Cities. So if I can provide a little bit of context behind the letter and how it came to fruition, and that again is in that meeting that is in my council report. The cities of, Carrie, did you want to jump in before I go down this?
Yes, just quickly, okay. There is a motion on the table that lacks a second. So before you discuss in support of it, I think there should be a second.
I can second it. Okay. So to give a little bit of context here, it's not that the jurisdictions are opposing this missing middle. That's not at all what it is. It's the fact that it is basically a mandate and preempts local control, while the legislature requires a certain type of housing without providing anything on the infrastructure side. And the jurisdictions that participated in the meeting, and I'm going to try to remember off the top of my head, it was Renton, Issaquah, Redmond, Smammish, Snoqualmie. I don't believe the Carnation mayor was present for the meeting, but she was looped in on things, and Duval, I believe, are the jurisdictions that were all a part and would be, if so approved by their councils and or strong mayors, would be signing on. So there was strong support from everybody on that phone call for the fact that infrastructure is critical. And I can speak to cities like Duval, who are in that non-contiguous UGA, right? Where we're in the contiguous UGA. And then as soon as you depart Sammamish, you're in unincorporated King County. You are not in the UGA, but as soon as you drive into Snoqualmie, as soon as you drive into Carnation or Duval, you are now in the non-contiguous UGA. They do not have infrastructure to support the type of growth that this legislation, which I further detailed with the Senate, the companion bill in the Senate for the House bill on this later in my council report that went out. But there are concerns from AWC, which is the Association of Washington Cities. Everyone has the same concerns. The group that collectively met, largest concern is that the infrastructure has to accompany the growth, and the legislature has to then be able to provide some of those finances. And we as the city of Sammamish are looking for some of those resources in the form of 202. So we are very much a part of asking for help on infrastructure. It was in our legislative priorities that this council has passed and has moved forward to the legislature. So I do feel like our legislative priorities dovetail in well with this letter, and that I do believe we should sign on. So there is a motion on the table. It has been seconded. I am opening it up to council for further discussion. Okay, Councilmember Moran.
What other cities have written separate letters, and do we have copies of those letters that have gone in?
So I sent you a copy of Duval's letter, but I guess the PDF did not embed in here. I don't have copies of anyone else's letter that they've sent to the legislature. I would imagine since that letter was crafted by the city of Issaquah, that Issaquah has also sent a letter.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they didn't. I hate to sign on to something without seeing the other letters.
Well, we're not signing on to other letters. We're signing on to this letter.
I understand, but without seeing the full background, I'm apprehensive.
Okay. Just for clarification, this letter has nothing to do with other jurisdictions' letters. So, okay, if there isn't any more discussion, we'll vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
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 Okay, so by a vote of 2 to 4, the nays have it. We will not sign on to the letter, and I will alert the other jurisdictions that we will not be signing. I want to just go through my report, make sure there wasn't anything else that I needed to bring up. I apologize for how long my council report was. There were a lot of meetings, 2 of which occurred today. So I don't think there was anything else I needed to highlight, but thank you, council, for taking action. Now I want to turn it over to anyone else that might have a council report.
I do have a report, Mayor.
Okay, let me just make sure there isn't any other council members. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. As I discussed with the mayor and deputy mayor in our meeting on Monday, I was reviewing the agenda and I saw the minutes, and it discloses some charts in there about the appointments of commissions. But after discussing it with our interim city attorney, I think it's best that we do a full disclosure because we inadvertently didn't show all of the charts and graphs that night, which means we weren't open and transparent in the appointment of our commissioners. So I will read the following report to you, and the city clerk will show some slides up there so that the public can see how the council voted. And we won't dwell on it a lot, but those charts and everything are in the minutes, and they can be found, and I'll disclose that in here. The purpose of my report this evening is to ensure the transparency of the commission board appointment process that was completed on June 18th, but inadvertently not presented in its entirety that evening. This brief overview will provide the details behind the election appointment process and results for the commissioner appointments that occurred at the council meeting on January 18th, 2002. City Council had received resumes and ballots for making their choice of commissioner candidates for a variety of open commission seats. The votes were submitted by the council and tallied by staff. Staff had created a tally sheet of which council member voted for which candidate and the totals. This constituted the results of the ballots submitted for the different openings. The total tallies cast by the council members constituted which candidate would take which open seat, and different seats had some terms that would be longer than others. Those total of ballots submitted by the council members determined the length of the term of some open seats. The casting of the ballots took place in advance by the clerk's office and were pre-tallied in order to save time at the council meeting, but were not disclosed to anyone in advance. However, the tally sheets that were prepared to show that evening to the public of which council member voted for which candidate was inadvertently not shown to the public. This was an inadvertent oversight, and we are providing the tally sheet information this evening to correct this oversight and to allow the public to see that the actual votes that were cast by council members for the candidates. We apologize for the oversight and hope that the presentation corrects any concern or questions our community may have had regarding the validity of the process and the outcome. I want to reiterate that all the documents have been in the document center since being downloaded on January 19th. And all the documents related to the commission board process are available in the Civic Web /Document Center and are included in the January 18 meeting minutes, which were part of this evening's council agenda. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing this to be corrected.
Mr. City Manager, do we need to read this, or is it?
Pardon me?
Read the vote tally?
No, I wasn't going to go back over what the tally sheets were. I just wanted it to be evident to the community that they exist and where they can be found, if anybody wants to go and study it.
I don't have anything else unless.
Okay. No, I'm.
Mr. City Manager, you have anything additional on your report? No.
No, I don't. I do not. Thank you. Thank you, Leader.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, ayes have it. We are adjourned by a vote of 6-0. Thank you, Council. Thank you, staff.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.